Okay, perfect. All right. So what I want to share with you a little bit today is essentially who we are, and it's the Conflict Management Prevention Center, right? Um, just introducing what the center is, the suite of services that we can provide, and all the details that it involves. Introducing again a little bit about me. And I think you've already seen the bio and heard the bio as well, but this is me again. Again, I'm the CNPC manager for the Washington office and for law enforcement and for enterprise. So those are the program areas that I service specifically. As Anthony and I think Nessa may have mentioned also that under CNPC, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, we are located across the Forest Service in every single region. And we have portfolios under those areas, right? Service areas under those regions. And so this is essentially where I'm located here in the WO. And my primary areas where I cover. I'm usually on Mondays in the WO, but and today I'm not there. So I'm in Virginia out of my home today. But usually I'd actually be in the Yates building today. So the objectives today in this presentation is I want to introduce ourselves a little bit, talk about, myself a little bit, but what I do as far as a CNPC manager, also with Anthony, introduce him as well as his role as a CNP manager as well. Talk about CNPC itself, right? Again, what it involves, the suite of services that's included under that umbrella of ADR, alternative dispute resolution, and what that involves to discuss what conflict might look like and feel like. Talk about the benefits of how using ADR to navigate those challenging situations, how it can benefit you, right? Maybe the other party as well, and your team when it's used appropriately, successfully kind of navigated in that space. And then how staying positive, future focused, and really resilient despite all of those challenging circumstances can really help you in those moments, maybe where things are difficult. And we know that that's almost inevitable, right? There's going to be those moments and those hiccups along the way. So a little bit about what we are. So the CNPC program, so Conflict Management and Prevention Center, who we are. It's a service-wide program, as you can see here. So again, as I mentioned earlier, there's one of us, a CNPC manager located across the country, right? For service-wide in every single region, with me being in the Washington office all the way across, with Anthony being over in Region 6. The way I kind of look at it, and the way that somebody recently described
in progress.
Sorry. Is that you can think about CNPC as almost like conflict triage, right? It's when you are experiencing something in your workplace, and maybe you're trying to understand exactly how to navigate it, right? And you don't necessarily know what that might look like, what the resources may be that are available to you, and really how to move forward in that space. You can come to somebody like us, like me or Anthony, and we can be that first place to really come to really talk about it. To even just think about what's, again, happening, how you're feeling impacted, who the other parties might be, if you want to talk about that too, and what your options might be as well. And that could be options inside of Conflict Management Prevention Center, right? It could be those ADR techniques that we talked about, that suite of services, or it could be options outside of CNPC, those other resources that are available to you within WIPO, perhaps maybe even in mindfulness or in wellness or in other areas that could be useful to you as well. So in these first few moments, when you are sharing with us how you're feeling and what you're experiencing, as a manager in that moment, we are thinking about all the possible options and all the various resources that could be helpful to you. And we're going to lay those out to you as possible ways we can help you. So that's that moment of, again, that conflict triage that we're looking at. So who can access this program? All Forest Service employees can access the program and the center. The only, and you can see here, there's a little asterisk here in this space. The only kind of caveat here is that contractors, there might be an extra step in that process. And what that means is that in some cases, if a person is contracting with the Forest Service, there's a possibility that they have their own human resources program or their own human resources office. And in that case, if they do, we'd have to make sure that we're consulting with them to make sure that they are allowed to work with us, or we're allowed to work with them, right? So we're going to make sure that we're navigating that space respectfully and with professional courtesy to ensure that our program and their HR program are fully aware of what's happening and that we're, again, working together seamlessly in that space. I've never had a hiccup in this regard, but we would just want to make sure, again, that we're checking off all the boxes to make sure that it's all okay. So that's the only space where there could be just a little bit of an extra step that has to happen. But other than that, all Forest Service employees are absolutely welcome to use all of our resources. So what is the goal of CMPC? It's really twofold. The way I look at this, and Anthony, please jump in at any time. It really is truly twofold. There's this first space of where there's this need to be responsive, right? This immediate need to respond to a situation that is occurring, right? There's a conflict. There's a need for us to step in and assist, right? So in that moment, again, like we talked about in that conflict triage space, we are looking at the full situation through a neutral lens. We are trying to look at what options are available and providing services as quickly as we can. Certainly trying to be, cost effective and mindful of all the parties that are involved, right? So there's that responsive need to a conflict that's occurred, right? But there's also this very proactive side that is present within CMPC right now. And this is almost leading the charge within CMPC at the moment. This is this component of certainly education about who we are and what we do. There's certainly that part. But there's this element almost of education right now within CMPC about folks wanting to be given the skills and maybe the skill set that's needed to navigate conflict on their own and independently of us, which has been this really great, interesting, and kind of cool emerging trend that we're seeing. So, and that's coming in the form of our CMPC webinars that happen every month. It's also just in the work that we're doing, like, Anthony and I do training just, in our own program areas, in our own regions. But there is this this want and this need for education around conflict management, right? Or conflict navigation, essentially, right? There's also this proactive trend right now of coaching, where folks want to work with us independently and to just learn how to navigate their work environment more effectively, to maybe navigate conflict more effectively, to communicate more effectively, just to be more conflict competent as employees and as leaders. And so again, there's this twofold goal right now, and is for us to be able to be responsive when there's a conflict, and also to make sure that we're equipping our employees and leaders with all the skills needed to navigate conflict successfully, kind of independently of us, essentially. So what is conflict? As in this picture, that's when things can get really tense. And hopefully it never gets that tense for you. But conflict, what I want you to think about with conflict is that in a lot of cases, in most cases, even in the best of scenarios, it can be inevitable. Conflict, it happens. Again, even like, Anthony and I have a really great team. We enjoy a team that's a really close-knit team, but there's going to be miscommunications. There's going to be moments and hiccups along the way where it just does happen. And it's usually because there's differing needs or wants or goals or values, or we do work differently. We have different ideas of what that might look like or feel like. Maybe we communicate it in a way that didn't land well. It happens, right? The bigger part of conflict is how we approach it, right? Um, it's how we're working through it, and if we're using respect, if we're communicating respectfully with each other, as we're navigating, those hiccups, as we're navigating, that communication that didn't land well, right? Conflict can also be really positive. And for some folks, it's hard for folks to kind of reconcile that. They think that's not possible, right? But it really can be. And I think for some folks, and a lot of folks, who are maybe conflict avoidant, they don't even want to look at it to really navigate it in a positive space, right? However, when conflict is approached with respect, right? When it's approached in a really positive way, it can bring about innovation, increased efficiencies. It can actually improve relationships, build bridges, in communication that's much needed. It can foster better trust, and it can establish boundaries that are very much needed, right, to foster again those relationships that we're protecting, right? So it can be positive based on how we approach it. So the types of conflict that we most commonly see in CMPC, um, nearly all, and Anthony and I always talk about this one, I would probably say all, right? I'm correcting myself, Anthony. All of them had a foundation in communication. And what we mean by that is that a conflict always starts, I would say, probably nearly always starts with a lack of communication, a miscommunication, or some form of inappropriate communication. And it may not have been intended, but it just landed in a space that didn't feel right for the other person, right? So it's communication based. And where it went from there, it can go in all different directions from that point. But the starting point was nearly always communication based. Okay. What we also see is, performance disputes. Certainly, we'll see a kind of an uptick in service requests when there's, quarterly check-ins, because there's just different ideas of expectations, or expectations were never really clearly defined. And so when we're checking in those quarterly reviews, there's just a miscommunication on what was expected or how it showed up, and so there's just that, that conflict around that. We will oftentimes also see disciplinary disputes, and those are more conduct based versus performance based, or so conduct based, where folks might get a little bit off track on what it might look like. Again, expectations based, oftentimes, of what they should be doing and how they should be doing it, and sometimes having a conversation around what those expectations should be, or what they are to be, are very much needed. Again, we kind of all go back to communication in this, and how critically important it is to have a conversation around expectations when it comes to performance and conduct, right? And then we'll sometimes also have process-oriented disputes, and sometimes we'll see those in, certainly we can see those in one-on-one conversations, but usually they are larger when it comes into teams, when there is like efficiency type, driven conversations around what's working best for a team in those spaces. What you'll also notice on this slide is that we typically don't, not within CMPC. You can certainly come to us if there are concerns around workplace violence or other types of serious misconduct like sexual harassment, or other types of sexual misconduct. But what we would do in those cases is make sure that you're referred to the appropriate person, because within CMPC, we wouldn't feel as if that would be something that ADR necessarily could manage, if that makes sense. It wouldn't be appropriate. And we wouldn't want anyone who felt victimized or felt unsafe to be put into a space like a mediation or facilitation to feel as if they're re-victimized by being put into like an unsafe space. So we'd want to make sure that you are protected, and working with the appropriate resources in those cases. So think of CNPC as very much communication based, right? Expectations and boundaries, and working through that conflict that falls into that space. And again, you can come to us if you're looking for resources, and we'll make sure that you find the appropriate person. The role of the neutral, and this is just very, very important, because neutrality is one of the pillars of our work as a CNPC manager. And you'll hear others in just a moment. But with this one, when you come to us to discuss your concerns, or any kind of conflict that you're working through, when we share options with you, and we talk about resources, and we are in this space of a sounding board, or a reality checker, or a listener of what's happening to you, maybe even an option builder, or in this space of problem solving, kind of co-problem solver, right? We are still looking at that situation, that conflict, that issue through a very neutral lens, right? That is our role. Our neutrality is very much important to us, and it's something that we protect in our role. And that is because all parties are coming to us in that space of a neutral. We're third-party neutrals, right, as CNPC managers. And so are all of our mediators, our facilitators, and anybody that is acting in that space with us in CNPC. So when you're coming to us in that space, we are not acting as advocates or representatives, even though we very much care. And you'll likely sense that there is compassion. When you come to us, we are hearing you. We are often feeling very deeply for what you're going through. And oftentimes, again, I think that you'll sense that we are still presenting options to you from a very neutral space and capacity. So just to kind of touch on that. And again, all of our, again, mediators and facilitators and folks will be doing the same thing. Also, what's also important to note is that we are certified neutrals, right? And that in our neutrality, again, and our certifications are upheld within the USDA. So it's something that we must maintain on an annual basis. And again, feel free to ask questions, and Anthony, feel free to jump in too. So who are our neutrals? Because if you can think about it, the Forest Service is a huge agency, and there's about 12 of us. So you can imagine that we're incredibly busy, and we stay incredibly busy, but we also use resources like this to assist us. The 12 of us located Forest Service wide in each region are internal, and we're full-time, right? So we're full-time neutrals who are, again, located internally, right? Many of us do have collateral duty cadres of mediators or facilitators that work with us. And we need that cadre to assist us with kind of the vast amount of business that does come in, and this need for additional, again, mediators and facilitators to help us with those sessions that are occurring, again, throughout our areas and in our regions. So those are collateral duty resources that we use. There are also times that we will utilize the enterprise program, especially for facilitations and those types of services, which it's and training. It's extremely helpful. And there are times also that we'll use external resources like other USDA agencies or other government agencies, certainly shared neutrals programs, community services and contractors. And oftentimes we'll use those external resources, especially if there is perhaps a really high profile case, or if there's a conflict of interest type of case. We'll bring in other resources to assist us in those situations. But for the most part, we're using internal resources because they're more cost effective, because we're trying to make sure that we manage that successfully. And we're also trying to make sure that we're really timely and we're using quality control right within our programs and our program areas. And so but we're definitely looking at all of these resources, because we also want to make sure that we are matching the third party neutral to the case as well. So we're looking at all of that when we're looking and assessing each case. The technique. So I mentioned earlier alternative dispute resolution, right? And that umbrella of techniques. This is essentially the full that we use in the Forest Service's umbrella of techniques. And you'll see that there's some asterisks next to the ones that some of the top ones there. And that's because those are the ones that we use most commonly, most frequently here. Consultation being the first and most used. And let me just explain what that is. A consultation is that first initial phone call, right? Or that first initial meeting with us, where you're describing what's happening, how you're feeling impacted, and we're discussing some of those options that are available to you, right? Or the resources, again, within CMPC, or maybe even external to CMPC, right? So that's that initial first contact with us, right? Conflict coaching is that next option. And sometimes within the consultation, it sometimes segues to conflict coaching, right? We start talking about some of the skills that you might want to utilize as you're navigating that situation, right? We start talking about how you can best, work through it. Maybe some goals you might want to set, and how we can help you get to those goals, right? So conflict coaching is around that type of area, what you want to improve, how you might want to improve it, and how we can get you there, right? So think about conflict coaching. That is, again, one of those emerging techniques that is just, I think for Anthony and I both, it's just, it is far exceeding even consultations, I think, at this point. Folks are really interested in learning more about what they can do for themselves and how they can better equip themselves with tools to navigate things independently on their own. And then you'll see mediation. That's when we're sitting down with the parties, right? And discussing the situation that's happened, right? Discussing the conflict and figuring out together, essentially as a team, how we can work through this and how we can bring about resolution. Same with facilitation. There can be a guided conversation in that space, which feels very informal. And facilitation can also be large, a group facilitation as well, which is common too. And then there's team building. And team building can incorporate things like, you'll see below there, really proactive tools like Myers-Briggs type indicator, or like the DISC, or EQI, the emotional and social intelligence. It oftentimes, with team building, incorporates a personality or a behavioral assessment to gel the team together, right? They're trying to get to know each other, or, work towards a common goal together. It's usually forming and gelling and bonding a team, right? And using a tool sometimes helps you get there. And then there's group intervention, and that's a tool or a technique or a service that's used oftentimes when there might be an underlying issue with the group, and we're trying to understand a little bit more of the why behind it. So we're trying to get to know the team a little bit more. There might be a little bit of a pulse check with that service. And then we go in to the group and have a facilitation as well. So with group intervention, that can be a layered approach where there's a pulse check as well as a facilitation. So again, trying to understand the root cause of what may be hindering the group from being at their peak performance at times. And then we get into some of the assessments, which is Myers-Briggs. Some of you probably are familiar with Myers-Briggs. Some training around that. Oftentimes we incorporate training, and I'm going to share some training with you in just in a minute. Disc plus values is also a super, super popular one that's more behavioral based versus personality based. True Colors is a very new one for us that Anthony and I just got certified in about a week ago. If anybody wants to be guinea pigs, come and let us know. We can try out our new certification on you. We're actually super excited about this one because it's fun and it's not too deep, right? It's just a very light-hearted personality assessment. At the same time, being I think very interesting and in depth at the same time. It's really fun. And then EQI is emotional and social intelligence, and this is another one that is really becoming a new and emerging, I think, assessment that folks have wanted more of recently. Um, Very much interested in gaining additional self-awareness around where they land in this EQI space. So that's one that might be interesting to you. And then boss whispering. And I know folks are always pause on boss whispering. Like, what is boss whispering? They think it's like dog whispering or like horse whispering. It's in that same kind of space of being able to really tap into this skill, right, of leadership, but it's also through this lens of this very intensive coaching effort, essentially, and is oftentimes used when someone lacks self-awareness in their communication skill, and they're often viewed as abrasive. And so this technique is very specific, and there's only certain candidates that really fall into this space. But it's highly effective when folks kind of enter into it and they're receptive to learning. It has a 360 evaluation as part of this effort, so it's really cool. And then there's the conflict dynamics profile, CDP, which gives you an idea of how you navigate conflict, if you're like accommodating or competitive or collaborating, those types of things. What's really cool about CDP is that it also has this very interesting scale, and I'm not going into great detail about it, but it tells you how and when you navigate conflict most effectively. And it's incredibly enlightening. It's something that I found that was even for myself, and as a CNPC manager, when I took this, it was just enlightening for me to see what points in conflict I'm not at my best, and it kind of pinpoints exactly when and how that happens. So it's incredibly illuminating. So that's the full suite of services that CNPC offers. Here's a snapshot of some of the trainings that we offer, but this is not the full schedule. It's just a little bit of a highlight of some of the bigger categories I wanted to share with you. What I've included for you on this slide is a link to our SharePoint site. So if you're interested to see everything that we offer, including a link to our recordings, where we have the presentation slides, as well as, again, you can view all of the recordings that we've done for years past. Go to that SharePoint site and you can see everything that we've done. If you're interested in having a session for your team that's tailored for you, or even a session just one-on-one, let us know and we can do that. But this will give you an idea of everything that's offered to you. So the benefits of ADR, and there's probably more than just these few. Confidentiality, as I mentioned, you're going to hear about another pillar of our work. That's probably one of the biggest ones, is confidentiality. Neutrality is certainly a big one, but confidentiality is probably the biggest one. When you come and speak to me or to Anthony or to one of the other CNPC managers, it's just between us. It is held with just us, right? And that's so critically important. And that's something that we are fiercely protective of. The only things that fall outside of that is if there's a threat to the harm to self or others, right? So if there's that threat that's posed, right? Outside of that threat to self or harm to others. Everything that is said stays, strictly within us, within our conversation, right? It's confidential, 100%. So just know that again, that's something that we are just fiercely protective of. It's also informal. So, you know, while there might be a couple of forms here and there that we might share with you, really, truly, it is a conversation. And even in the facilitative space, it's going to feel like a guided conversation. We want you to feel as if the conversations are a safe space, that we're listening ears, and that we truly care about what's happening with you. And we're going to figure out a pathway to get you to some form of resolution. And that's where we hope that you feel like really comfortable in that informal space, right? It is voluntary, but you can see there's also a little star on this one too. It's voluntary for employees, right? It is not voluntary for supervisors, kind of in your chain of command, right? So if you request as an employee ADR of your supervisor, right? Your supervisor must participate. Okay, that's a Forest Service policy. It's a USDA policy. That is how we feel. It's important that our leadership engages in ADR should an employee, request that. So it's a code and commitment, is a value, the Forest Service, right? That we're all engaging in these types of valuable conversations, right? But as an employee, if it's requested of you by your supervisor, you don't have to participate. And if it's requested of you by your peer, you don't have to participate. That's something that you can consider, weigh the benefits, and then let us know what works best for you. Okay. It's cost effective, as we talked about. Most of our resources are internal. And in many cases, we're navigating facilitations and trainings and mediations in a virtual space. And so we'll try to keep that, as cost effective as possible. It's also timely. We have a policy that we will reach out to you within 24 hours of you contacting us to at least start the conversation, to understand what's happening, to best assist you, to provide some options. And then we'll start scheduling. If there's a session that's needed or something, that we'll start scheduling as quickly as everyone's available. So it's try to be as timely as possible. What we also try to build in is personal ownership and responsibility, understanding that we all have to understand our role just a little bit, right? It's a learning moment in those spaces for all of us, a little bit, right? And it's an opportunity for us to teach and to learn, right? So we do build that in as part of the process. That's something that we truly encourage. And this is not a replacement for any other forms of redress. And what I mean by that is that if you choose to come to CMPC and utilize one of the services under, that the umbrella of ADR, one of those techniques, this doesn't mean that you still can't file a complaint with the AH, right, with the anti-harassment program. And it doesn't mean that if you feel as if it wasn't resolved, that you still can't file a complaint with an EEO, right? You can still go to civil rights, you can still go to the anti-harassment complaint process, you can still go to the union, should you feel that's the more appropriate route. How we see CMPC and the use of ADR is that this is an early intervention attempt at resolving conflict, right? But it doesn't stop you. Excuse me, I caught a little cold last week. I'm trying to suppress it and pretend like it didn't happen, but it's sneaking out on me. It doesn't stop you from utilizing any other resources, right? And if you feel as if this wasn't successful within CMPC, right, you can still go and utilize, again, AH or civil rights or the union or any of those other, forms of redress. So this doesn't stop you from doing that, right? And again, what we hope is that this is a valuable learning lesson, right, for everyone involved. Again, it's a learning moment, it's a teaching moment for everybody involved. And we hope to frame it that way. What we also attempt to do is look at this through this lens of being really future focused. And while we recognize that much of the conversation talks about what happened, um, and we honor that and acknowledge that it's an important part of the conversation is what did happen. What we also want to do is then look to the future of what we can do to prevent it from happening again, right? And how we can move you forward to what can be better now. How to rebuild a relationship, how to rebuild trust, what this might look like from this point forward, right? So, and then to put things behind you and move on from it, right? Because in so many cases, what we've often seen is that this baggage keeps getting carried along the way in every job and every relationship, and it's so incredibly unhealthy. And we don't want that for you. And sometimes that's part of the coaching conversations that we have is how to leave that baggage behind and be future focused, right? Moving forward. What we also will talk about oftentimes is how to take care of you throughout all of this and to make sure that you are taking care of you. And so some of the resources that we might recommend is the wellness program. You might hear us talk about EAP, which is the Employee Assistance Program. You might hear us talk about resiliency and mindfulness. You might hear us talk about that a lot. And that's because we do care and we understand how stressful conflict can be and how if you're not taking care of yourself as we're working together through this conflict situation, it can really take a toll on you. And so we want you to take care of you while we're working through this together. And so you'll hear us talk about, how are you? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you practicing self-care? What are you doing? And here are some resources to help you. And so it's a really critical part of, your health and maintaining your health and your professionalism. Because what we find sometimes is that when that's not being taken care of, sometimes that professionalism starts to kind of lack as well. And what we don't want is a situation to worsen because your health is worsening, or the situation worsens because other things start to fall off, the wayside. We want to make sure that you're fully intact and you're fully well as we're working through the situation together. So we're going to make sure that we're checking in on all those things. We also want you to maintain focus on the things that are within your control. And sometimes that's really hard. And I get it. Sometimes when you feel wronged or you feel hurt, how you want to resolve that problem it's big. We want sometimes we want retribution. I'll be honest. Sometimes we want that other person to really, pay the price for that wrongdoing. And I get it. I get it. I do. We're human beings. However, sometimes that's not within our scope of authority. And sometimes that's outside of our range. And sometimes chasing that is it's even more so painful because you're never going to get to that space. So what we want to do is kind of bring you back to this focus of where you can control those actions, those things that you actually can do, where you actually can make movement, where you actually can affect change, and bring you back to that space and kind of have you make movement and have you affect change where it does feel really positive and not chasing after things that just cannot be done, where it feels like this endless chain, this endless kind of chase, where it just kind of causes more hurt. So we're going to kind of bring you back. And that's part of that reality checking that we'll often do, right? And then again, that opportunity to learn and to teach. And it's so valuable to be able to share your own perspective through your own lens and to hear somebody else's perspective through their lens, and then to kind of find that middle space, to move forward together. It's incredibly powerful when that happens. It can be magic in those moments. What I wanted to share with you just really quickly before I pass things on to Anthony is that these are your regional contacts, starting with me at the top. And then you'll see Kimberly's in Region 1 and Lorraine's in Region 2. You'll see Jenny with Job Corps. You'll see Laura is out there in Region 3, Martine's at the ASC, you got Dave in Region 4, Marquette's out there in Region 5. You see Anthony, Region 6, and Teresa's in Region 8. Trish is in Region 9, and Christy's in Region 10. You don't have to worry about that. We're going to send you all of this, and then you'll also see the CMPC SharePoint site, the link there for all of this information, as well as the contact list too. So hopefully you'll be able to access that in case you have any more questions about what the resources are, or anything, the training that I shared with you and all those things. So let me just pause and ask you if you have any questions or thoughts or anything from me at all before I hand things over to Anthony. What is on your mind for me about CMPC? Yeah, Anthony. Anthony, what is your question or thought? Or did I miss anything? Did I forget to share anything? Help me.
So you mentioned that there were some situations, like let's say somebody wanting to get rid of their boss because their boss sucks and is treating them like crap.
Yes.
And you said that sometimes we don't really have the ability or whatever to actually do anything about that. I think you're the epitome of who we all try to be, except I think you need to get rid of that sometimes and say that we never have the ability or the authority to actually make any kind of change or something like that because somebody comes to us and they ask for our assistance. Our assistance doesn't involve us waving a magic wand and all of a sudden your problems are eliminated. So I just want to change your sometimes to never or always or whatever.
Yeah,
That's
thank you
all.
for that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I tend to sugarcoat things just a little bit if you haven't noticed. I want my kindness comes into play just a little bit. I'm like, oh, maybe we can figure things out, and maybe I can fix this for you. And you're right, Anthony's right. That those big ones, like I want my boss fired, and we get that. We get that. We get that more times than you would think. Those are things that we obviously can't do and we don't have authority to do. But we can talk things through and think about other things that, again, that are within your reach, that are within your control. And that's when we start going into that problem solving mode, that option building mode of, what are other things that would help? What are other things that make you feel whole? What are other things that make you feel happy again? Like what would make you enjoy your work again? Let's talk about those things, kind of refocusing, redirecting. And then we can start getting to some real, real work there, things that we can actually make happen. So, so Anthony's absolutely right.